Emma Caldwell sat in the cold, sterile law office, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. The polished mahogany table stretched before her, separating her from her brother Ryan and her sister Laura, two people who had never truly seen her as family. Only as an inconvenience. Their father, William Caldwell, had built an empire in the world of finance. His name carried weight, his company controlled millions, and his influence shaped industries. Now, after his sudden death, his fortune was being divided. Emma already knew how this would go. She wasn't the favored child. She wasn't the business-minded heir. She had always been the outlier, the one who didn't fit their mold. The one who had chosen her own path instead of following in their carefully curated footsteps. The attorney cleared his throat, his voice calm and measured as he read from the will. To my son, Ryan Caldwell, I leave 70% of my estate, including Caldwell Investments and all associated assets. Ryan smirked, barely hiding his satisfaction. Of course, it had always been him. To my daughter, Laura Caldwell, I leave the remaining 30%, including the family estate in the Hamptons and all liquid assets. Laura crossed her legs, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she flicked her hair over her shoulder. Emma waited, knowing what was coming, and then it happened. To my daughter, Emma Caldwell, the attorney hesitated, then, without a trace of emotion, he finished reading. I leave nothing. Silence. Emma stared straight ahead, her face unmoved, even as Ryan let out a quiet chuckle. Well, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. I guess Dad finally made it official. You were never really part of this family. Laura smirked, shaking her head. Honestly, Emma, what did you expect? You walked away from everything Dad built. Why would he leave you anything? The attorney shifted uncomfortably, as if wanting to be anywhere but here. Emma inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of their words settle over her. They thought this would break her. They thought she would crumble under the weight of rejection. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Ryan's smirk falter just slightly. Emma stood, adjusting her coat. You're right, she said, her voice even. I never was part of this family. She picked up her bag and turned toward the door. But before she left, she glanced back over her shoulder, meeting Ryan's gaze. We'll see how that works out for you. Then she walked out, leaving them behind. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming next. Emma stepped out onto the busy Manhattan street, the cold air biting against her skin. The city pulsed around her, people rushing past, taxis honking, skyscrapers towering above. But for the first time in a long time, she felt weightless. They had cut her out. No inheritance, no piece of the Caldwell empire, no financial security tied to her father's name. But the thing was, she never wanted it. She didn't need their money. What stung wasn't the loss of wealth, it was the message behind it. You don't matter. You never did. Emma clenched her fists in her pockets, her breath coming out in small white clouds. Fine. She didn't need them. She never had. Back at her small Brooklyn apartment, she tossed her bag onto the couch and pulled out a worn envelope, one she had nearly forgotten about. The handwriting on the front was shaky but familiar. It was from her grandfather, Charles Caldwell, the only person in the family who had ever truly believed in her. She carefully opened it, her eyes scanning the words written years ago. Emma, if you're reading this, it means you're at a crossroads. And knowing our family, I have a feeling they've made sure you were left with nothing. But I want you to know something. They were wrong about me. And they're wrong about you. You were never meant to chase their approval. You were meant for something greater. That's why I'm leaving you something of real value, if you're willing to take a chance on it. Go to 127 Oakwood Street. The key is inside. Her heart pounded as she reached into the envelope and pulled out a small, rusted key. What was at 127 Oakwood Street? She had no idea, but something told her this was the real inheritance, one her father never wanted her to have. And she was about to find out why. Emma gripped the small, rusted key in her palm as she stood in front of 127 Oakwood Street. It was nothing like the towering glass buildings her family owned. No marble lobbies, no corporate logos. Instead, she found herself staring at an old industrial warehouse. its brick walls weathered with time, its massive iron doors standing firm against the passing years. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. The lock was stiff, but with a sharp twist. The key clicked into place. She pushed the door open, and a wave of dust and history greeted her. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long beams over rows of machinery, stacks of old books, and workbenches covered in blueprints. This wasn't just some abandoned property. This was a workshop, a laboratory, a place of invention. And suddenly, she understood. Her grandfather, Charles Caldwell, the man her father had dismissed as a failed dreamer, hadn't just been tinkering with old ideas. He had been working on something revolutionary. Emma's fingers traced over a stack of old sketches, her eyes widening as she realized what she was looking at. A new type of printing technology. One that could produce fully biodegradable materials. A process that could replace plastic packaging on a massive scale. Her breath caught. This wasn't just an inheritance. This was a goldmine, a legacy her father had ignored. And now, it was hers. Emma's pulse quickened as she pulled out her phone. She had a call to make. "Liam," she said the moment her old contact picked up. "I need you to come to Brooklyn. Now." A pause. Then, "Emma, what's going on?" She looked around the workshop. Her grandfather's unfinished work waiting for someone who actually believed in it. "I think I just found something that could change everything." Liam Parker arrived at the warehouse an hour later, stepping through the massive iron doors with cautious curiosity. He had always been a sharp investor, known for spotting groundbreaking ideas before the world caught on. But as he looked around at the dust-covered workbenches and aging blueprints, his skepticism was clear. "This is what you dragged me to Brooklyn for?" he asked, crossing his arms. Emma didn't answer. She simply handed him one of her grandfather's old sketches. Liam frowned as he studied it, flipping the page, then the next, his expression shifting from amusement to something more serious. "Wait, this is a biodegradable polymer printing process," Emma finished. "A way to replace plastic packaging without relying on petroleum-based materials. My grandfather developed it years ago, but no one ever took him seriously." Liam let out a low whistle. "And you think it actually works?" Emma moved to a nearby workbench, brushing the dust off a half-assembled prototype printer. She placed a fragile-looking sheet of material onto the surface and hit the switch. The machine whirred to life, and in moments, it produced a fully formed container, flexible, durable, and completely biodegradable. Liam picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "Holy hell," he muttered. "This could be huge." Emma nodded. "I know." Liam set the prototype down carefully, his mind already working through the possibilities. "If this scales, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar disruption. The packaging industry, supply chains, this could change everything." Emma's jaw tightened. "And that's exactly why my father ignored it. He was too busy chasing power and profit to see the future right in front of him." Liam studied her for a moment, then smiled. "You know, Emma, I've backed a lot of businesses. But I don't just invest in ideas, I invest in people." He extended his hand. "And I think you're about to build something no one will ever ignore again." Emma didn't hesitate. She shook his hand. And just like that, her grandfather's forgotten dream was about to become her legacy. 6 months later, the world knew Emma Caldwell's name. What had once been an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn was now the headquarters of Everprint Technologies, the company Emma built from her grandfather's forgotten research. Her biodegradable printing process had already secured major contracts with global companies desperate to replace plastic packaging. Retail giants, food chains, and even pharmaceutical companies lined up, eager to claim a stake in the future of sustainable production. And the best part? Emma had done it without a single dollar from the Caldwell fortune. She was on the cover of business magazines. Investors flooded her inbox. The very people who once ignored her, who saw her as nothing, were now scrambling to be part of what she had created. Then came the inevitable. Ryan Caldwell called. Emma saw his name flash across her phone screen and let it ring twice before answering. "Emma," he said, his voice smoother than usual. Forced. "We should talk." Emma smiled. "Talk? Now? Why would we need to do that?" There was a pause. Then, The truth. Caldwell Investments is in trouble. Of course it was. Their outdated, short-sighted business model had left them vulnerable. The industry was shifting, and Ryan wasn't smart enough to see it coming. Emma leaned back in her chair. And let me guess, you need funding? Ryan exhaled sharply. Look, I know things haven't always been fair between us. But this is an opportunity for both of us. Caldwell Investments has the infrastructure, the reach. You have the technology. If we work together, we can. No. Silence. Ryan's voice dropped. Sharper now. Emma, don't be foolish. This isn't personal. It's business. Emma let out a soft laugh. Oh, but it was personal, wasn't it? When you sat there in that law office, smirking while I was cut out of the will? When you told me I was never really part of this family? Ryan didn't respond. Emma continued, her voice cool and measured. The difference between you and me, Ryan, is that you needed our father's money to matter. I never did. She let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. Then she delivered the final blow. If you're looking for funding, Everprint Technologies isn't interested. But I hear Caldwell Investments is on the market for buyers. She smiled. Who knows? Maybe I'll make an offer. Ryan's breath hitched, just slightly. Emma hung up. She wasn't just written out of the will. She had rewritten the future. And in the end, she had the last laugh. 1 year later, Emma Caldwell sat in the very same law office where she had once been humiliated. But this time, she wasn't on the receiving end of a betrayal. This time, she was the one in control. The name Caldwell Investments was no longer the powerhouse it had once been. After a series of poor decisions, failed investments, and desperate restructuring attempts, the company had finally collapsed under its own weight. And Emma? She had waited for this exact moment. She flipped open the folder in front of her, scanning the final acquisition documents. Everprint Technologies was officially buying out Caldwell Investments for pennies on the dollar. Across the table, Ryan and Laura sat in stunned silence, their faces pale as they stared at the contract. Ryan clenched his jaw. You're really going through with this? Emma smiled. Of course. It's just business, isn't it? Laura, who had once looked down on Emma like she didn't exist, leaned forward desperately. Emma, please. Emma held up a hand. Save it. She tapped a finger against the thick legal document in front of her. You both made it clear where we stood that day in this very office. You took everything our father built and let your greed drive it into the ground. She leaned back, watching as reality finally sank in for them. This company is mine now. Ryan let out a sharp breath, his ego finally broken. What are you going to do with it? Emma tilted her head. Well, Ryan, I could keep the name, restructure it, and try to salvage what's left, but why would I? She reached for the pen, signing her name with smooth, deliberate strokes. Then, she pushed the documents toward the attorney, sealing the deal. I think I'd rather watch it disappear. Ryan's eyes widened. You're going to shut it down? Emma grinned. No, I'm going to dismantle it, piece by piece, and integrate whatever's useful into Everprint Technologies. The Caldwell name will be gone. For good. Ryan looked like he might be sick. Laura whispered. Dad would be furious. Emma laughed softly. Dad never thought I was capable of anything. But here I am. She stood, gathering her things, and took one last look at the office where she had once been discarded like she was nothing. Now, she owned everything. As she walked toward the exit, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her past no longer defined her. Her success had spoken for itself. And in the end, she had the last laugh. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about rising above the people who doubted you. Emma was cast aside, told she was worthless. But instead of letting their judgment define her, she built something greater than they could ever imagine. She didn't just succeed, she erased the legacy of those who tried to erase her. What do you think? Did Emma's story inspire you? Comment 2 if you loved it. Or 7 if you think she should have handled things differently. And if you believe success is the best revenge. Hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive. Let's chat in the comments.